Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of Spline 101. Today we're going to explore scroll events by adding a cool animation effect to an AirPods model. Let's jump right in and get started. Before we dive into creating our scroll animation, let's take a quick look at the final project. I'll switch to play mode, and as you can see, a few things happen when we scroll. First, the inner parts of the AirPods are revealed in an exploded view. Second, the background shifts from white to a dark gradient. And finally, the AirPods themselves rotate slightly. Now that you've seen the final result, let's jump into the project and start creating these animations. To save us some time, I've already added the second state to all the objects in the scene. So let's get started with our first scroll event. After selecting the object, click the plus button in the Events section, and in the Events tab, select Scroll. Here you'll see two options, Steps and Scroll. Today, we're working with the Steps type. The Scroll type is mainly used when you want to add spline scroll animation to a web page. I'll explain how the Scroll type works briefly at the end of the tutorial. Back to the Steps type, it's straightforward. The only setting is the number of steps, which is currently set to 100. Let's go ahead and create our first transition to test it out. Now, when we go to play mode, you'll notice the object moves from its base state to its second state as we scroll. However, it's a bit slow. To speed it up, we need to reduce the number of steps. Let's change it from 100 to 20. Now, when we test it, the transition is much faster, moving between the two states with ease. That's the foundation of scroll events. Let's add another scroll event for our second object. Again, we'll adjust the number of steps to 20 and add a transition. Now, if we go to play mode, both objects move together, but for a more dynamic visual effect, a little delay can enhance the experience. So in the sequence section, let's add a 0.2 second delay, making the second object start a bit later. Make sure to set the start so it happens at the beginning of the transition. Now, instead of creating events from scratch for the other inner parts, we can copy the existing scroll event. To do this, right-click to copy the event, then select the third object. In order to access the right-click options, we need to have an event, so click the plus button. Now paste the event here and delete the one we created before. In the scroll event, we should change a couple of things. One is adjusting the target to the corresponding object, and the second is adding an additional 0.2 second delay. So for the third object, we'll set it to 0.4 seconds. Let's test that out. Perfect. Our third object now animates with the same scroll effect. We'll repeat this process for the remaining objects. Now that we're done, let's go to play mode, and as you can see, all the inner parts are working together flawlessly. Now let's add a rotation animation to the AirPods. We'll create another scroll event and set the steps to 20 to match the other objects. Let's test it. As you can see, the AirPods are rotating along with the other animations. The final step is to change the background color. This is easy, just copy the scroll event from the AirPods, paste it onto the background, and change the target to the background layer, which is a rectangle. Now when we play, everything works seamlessly. One thing to keep in mind, be sure to turn off zooming in the export panel settings if you want to maintain the position when zooming in and out. Otherwise, your viewport camera will zoom along with your animation. And that's it. You've now got a basic introduction to scroll events. As promised, let me quickly explain the second option we have for scroll events, the scroll type. So here we have a very basic Webflow page with two sections. The first section is pretty simple. It's mainly here to demonstrate how the scroll works. The important thing to note is that the height of this section is 1200 pixels. The second section is where our spline file will be embedded, and we're going to paste the URL for that here. Now let's move over to the spline file. I've duplicated the finished project, and we're going to select one of the objects with the scroll event applied, such as our background. Here we'll be choosing the scroll type. As you can see, we have a few options available. The first option relates to how the scroll animation begins. One of the options allows you to control when the scroll animation starts, based on when the component enters the viewport. You can see there are three options for this. Each one corresponds to a different trigger, whether the canvas reaches the bottom, middle, or top of the viewport. But since this is a basic example and not a web design tutorial, I'm going to select the simpler option, Page. This setting means that the scroll event will be tied to the page itself. Now, under Page, we have two main options to work with. The first is Start At, which determines when the animation begins. Right now, it's set to 0, meaning the animation will start immediately when the canvas reaches 0 pixels, essentially when the web page first loads. But since we've set up a 1200 pixel tall section in our design, we're going to change this value to 1200. This way, the animation will only start after the user has scrolled 1200 pixels down the page. The second option is End After, which controls how long the animation continues after the trigger point is reached. We'll leave this at the default of 400 pixels, meaning that after scrolling another 400 pixels, the animation will finish. I've already adjusted these scroll settings for all the other objects in our scene to save us some time. Now, let's go ahead and export the project. Click the Update Viewer button, then copy the URL link. Next, we'll go back to Webflow, and this is where we'll paste our URL. Now, if we switch to preview mode, you can see that as soon as we scroll down to 1200 pixels, the animation begins. As we scroll further down, the animation continues smoothly. That's the basic concept of how scroll events work on web pages. And with that, we've reached the end of this tutorial. If you enjoyed it, please hit the like button, subscribe, and click the bell icon to be notified of future tutorials.